Thank you and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2022 Post-Election Impact Webinar on the Arts. This is a program that we've been doing every 2 years for probably 2 decades. My name is Nina Oslu-Tunjli. I wear 2 hats here with Americans for the Arts. I'm the Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs, and I'm the Executive Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. Today, I'd like to go over what today's agenda is going to look like, the order of our speakers, and the time that we'll have for Q&A. We will start with an overview that Nolan Bivens, Americans for the Arts President and CEO, and I will share on overview of the election impact, and him specifically on advocacy opportunities during a climate of change. That will be followed by a panel of Congressional Federal Affairs staff, Tushar Swain and Tara Proby, along with guest speaker Jeremy Johnson, who's the president and CEO of Assembly for the Arts in Cleveland, Ohio. After they each provide their remarks, I'll begin to pose some of the questions that get posted in the Q&A section. And remember, those that get upvoted will have the highest chance that I'll be able to pose those questions to the panelists for this group. After that team of panelists concludes, we'll move on to state and local changes and grassroots impact on the arts. And hopefully we'll be able to have enough time for a Q&A section after that as well. These speakers will feature from Americans for the Arts team, Jay Dick, Senior Director of State and Local Government Affairs, and Josh Reynolds, our Government Affairs Coordinator. But we also have 2 great guest speakers with us and members, Tom DeCaney, Executive Director of Create California, and Patrick McWhorter, who's the CEO of Arizona Citizens for the Arts. And as I mentioned, that will be followed with a Q&A. And then we will conclude our webinar with remarks by the amazing Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon, representing the Portland, Oregon area. And she is not only the chair of the Congressional STEAM Caucus, but probably one of the best arts champions on Capitol Hill for us. So with that as the overview, I'd like to just kick off some top line takeaways that I have from the federal election. So in terms of party control, we've already seen from the headlines that the red wave didn't materialize, but it did materialize enough to flip control of the U.S. House of Representatives. The Senate will remain in control. The Democrats will remain in control of the Senate. At the moment, at minimally, it would be a 50-50 split, which is what they've been doing for the last 2 years anyways. Of course, what that means is Vice President Kamala Harris would be the tiebreaker, and that's why it's noted that it's primarily a democratically controlled, ultimately, Senate. However, there's a big Georgia runoff happening with incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock, who certainly led in the general election with votes, but because he didn't reach the 50% point in Georgia, that triggers an automatic runoff, which will happen on December 6th. If he wins, what that means is the Senate will have actual operating control of the Senate. And that means instead of sharing co-chairmanships, Republicans and Democrats of various committees, that means Democrats will have full control of the chairmanships, and then it will go to a ranking minority for those in Republicans. But it's still a very close margin. In some ways, control of either the House and Senate is nominal because it's going to require an enormous amount of negotiations, horse trading to get anything done. Now, the fact that the Senate did remain control of the Senate, it does make things a little bit easier for the White House to get judge appointments through, all of the political appointments for the federal agencies throughout, including National Endowment for the Arts, National Council on the Arts members, National Council on Humanities members. All of those are political appointments that have to be confirmed by the Senate only, not the House. So a lot of those will be able to still move relatively smoothly between the White House and the Senate. And there are quite a few vacancies that still have to be filled in many of the cultural agencies, museums, and things like that. In terms of our on the House side, one of the key things here is, yes, there is going to be party control leadership. So that means the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader. And so people like Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, are actually not only not taking those positions because the Democrats lost control of the House, but they're actually not, they're going to step aside and just serve as members, and they're making room for the next generation of Democratic leaders to take those roles. So it looks very apparent with no opposition that Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn, New York, is going to become the new majority leader. If the Democrats had won, that would have meant Speaker of the House. But when they're in the minority, he's going to be the majority leader of the Democrats. And he will also be sharing leadership with Catherine Clark, who represents the Boston, Massachusetts area, and Pete Aguilar of the San Bernardino Inland Empire area of California. They will be your top House leaders on the Democratic side. And on the Republican side, and by the way, all of those three have an excellent arts voting record. Hakeem Jeffries runs a hip hop caucus, which is very cool. He does a hip hop event every year that is just phenomenal. So you have people who have the arts running through their blood. And then on the House side, Kevin McCarthy of California, Steve Scalise of Louisiana will be the new Speaker of the House and the majority leader for Republicans. And there will be some others as well, but those are the two big names that you need to know. What I can share about this is that neither of them have a good arts voting record. Pretty much it's zero in terms of taking pro-arts action on key arts legislation, dear colleague letters, co-sponsoring bills that are pro-arts. They have not taken action on any of them. But on the flip side, I want to remind everyone that not too long ago, in 2016-17, when the House was controlled by Republicans, the Senate was controlled by Republicans, and the White House was controlled by Republican, Donald Trump in this case, that the arts actually not only survived, they thrived. There were increases in funding for all of these things, and it has a lot to do with the hard work of bipartisan support that you as grassroots members across the country have been building with both sides, both parties, both chambers, to get support for the arts, for them to realize that it is integral to domestic policy in this country. So there's a lot of room to work with, and it wasn't that long ago, in the last year of the Trump administration, split control of the Senate, and yes, it was a Democratic controlled House, that the largest ever funding bill to help support the arts, Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, was passed with $13 billion, largest ever, $13 billion of COVID relief support to help live arts venues get through COVID. And this all happened in a divided government. So while there are changes afoot, there are also always opportunities ahead of us. And with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nolan Bivens, who is the president and CEO of Americans for the Arts. Nolan.
Thank you so very much, Anita. I trust I'm on screen. Well, thanks, Nina, and entire Americans for the Arts staff and contributors on today's call for putting this timely seminar and webinar together. Nina just shared with you some highlights of all the political change that's been happening. I'd like to focus a little bit and just underscore this notion of how change does, in fact, present some opportunities. And particularly, we have opportunities to, I think, move that needle a little bit in about three major areas. One, we have the ability to forge new relationships with elected officials. Nina highlighted the idea of bipartisan. A lot of the efforts that we were able to achieve during COVID were born out of bipartisan relationships. So even though the change is here, we still have the opportunity to develop those new relationships and continue that trend as well. We also have the opportunity to forge advocacy alliances with new partners as well. We saw that happen in the last two crises as well. And we also have the opportunity to forge new and updated messaging points around the agenda that we have out there, specifically that come to my mind is arts and healing, loneliness, and also integrating the military families into our communities through an arts to economic impact. And also at the same time, we continue to have the arts economic impact, artists specifically, and elevating the specific role of the BIPOC communities within our arts and culture sector. Americans for the Arts and its Arts Action Fund, I would like to let you know, is going to be there to help you seize those opportunities all along the way. We are expanding our grassroots arts advocacy effort. Nina spoke to that. And that's a very key part to us to advance the stories, really your stories and your voices forward in the prominent way. Many times when I talk to congressional leaders, I get great joy in being able to carry forward your stories, and that's what they want to hear. And so I'm looking to continue to be able to do that as well. And I know that because you all are really the constituents. You're those grassroots community influencers out there. There are over 435 congressional districts, as many of you know, across the 50 states and the 6 territories that we have, as well as the district. And so we're really compelled to make sure that they understand your voices as a part of this story that we're excited to tell as well. I also like to point out that we want to be a little bit more strategic as well in this moment of change, and I think the opportunity that we have. We want to be strategic about training our art advocates throughout the country as we move forward, doing that with you and at many levels. We want to expand our network of congressional district and state advocacy captains. Again, another major cohort that play leadership roles in this advocacy effort. Couldn't do it without you. And secondly, we also want to have a little bit more strategic idea about organizing some timely fly-ins to bring the grassroots leaders here. It's not just one thing for me and my staff to be a part of it, but I'm looking for those opportunities when your compelling voices can come in and be a part of this story here with us as well. And we want to commit resources to allow that to happen as well in support of what you're achieving. And it works the other way around too, particularly as it goes back towards the states. We want to be able to support you as well. And it really doesn't stop there. I want to make sure that we're coming to your communities and looking ways to help you organize, do advocacy training, meeting with your congressional leaders, as well as the parts that we play here in the Capitol and the federal side. In 2023, also we'll be releasing the results of our economic impact study number 6. It's the largest ever. We have over 399 communities that are participating across the country. And most importantly this time, and for the first time, we have important data analysis on all of the BIPOC organizations that are contributing and participating in this study. We set a goal of making that 25% so that we can bring that reality into this economic success story for all of our arts and culture participants. Equity is going to be a critical part of what we do as we go forward. We have a term that we coin here, equitable advocacy, which simply means that we'll be centered in all of our programs, our advocacy agenda, internally and throughout the organization, externally. We're committed to this term and how we can make sure that everything that we do is done through this lens of equitable advocacy, through partnerships, legislative agenda, and also the programmatics that we'll be pursuing. Very, very key point as we move forward. So again, this is a great opportunity, I think, for change. We saw it. We benefited from it during the COVID crisis and all the other issues we went through. We're excited about this and we want to move forward with you in that. So thank you so very much for being here today. And I ask you to continue to support us, and we'll support you in all these efforts of advocacy. Thanks again.
Thank you, Nolan, for that. And I would like to now bring on the group of federal affairs folks who will be Tushar Swain, who's our Director of Policy at Americans for the Arts, Tara Probry, our Advocacy Manager at Americans for the Arts, and the phenomenal Jeremy Johnson, who's the President and CEO of Assembly for the Arts. You know, as the new Congress comes in, they'll be sworn in on January 3rd, and it will begin the 118th Congress, which will be a 2-year cycle. And I'm going to ask Tushar to begin with a deep dive into what changes are ahead in Congress. Tushar?
Thank you, Nina, and good afternoon, everybody. As Nina mentioned, Republicans will take control of the House on January 3rd, 2023, as the 118th Congress begins. While the narrow victory will likely weaken some Republican political capital, I think you will still see and can expect some oversight as well as a conservative agenda, which may impede some of the legislative work that Congress works on. I should note that there are still a few races, congressional races yet to be called. In California, there are 3 races that Republicans right now have the lead, though very narrowly. In Alaska, Mary Peltola has, who is the Democrat, actually has a wide lead over all Republicans in that race, including Sarah Palin. However, she does not have a majority, and they go through a system called ranked choice voting, which could then take several rounds to actually identify a winner. But we will continue to certainly monitor those races. Right now, Republicans have 218 seats to Democrats 212. Those again are the races that have been called, but more will come up over the course of this week, I would suspect. Incumbency mattered in these cases. 365 House districts, which faced an incumbent, in which there were 365 House districts in which an incumbent faced re-election, and only 9 of them lost their seats. So what does that mean for arts advocacy? That means, for the most part, all of our friends and all of our advocates are champions of arts legislation, whether it be creative economy legislation or funding initiatives such as NEA, NEH. All of those champions are back, so I think that that's good news. But also we have 74 new House members, 41 in the GOP, 33 who are Democrats. They will be coming in, so there will be some fresh new blood, and I think that it's pertinent for arts advocates to begin to meet with those members of Congress, because I think one thing we know for sure, no arts legislation will pass this Congress without bipartisan support. Lastly, arts are often the gateway for societal breakthroughs. And so on this webinar, I wanted to just take a quick second to acknowledge some congressional breakthroughs and some notable firsts. While I don't have time to go through all of them, I will quickly highlight Congressman-elect Maxwell Frost from Florida, who on several post-election interviews has said that the arts, music, and culture are important to societal fixes. So I think that he's going to be a very interesting person to watch during this Congress. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Congressional Arts Caucus is one of the largest and most active on Capitol Hill, and it's central to supporting arts and arts education in the House. There are currently approximately 137 members in the Congressional Arts Caucus. We will be losing 24 this year due to election losses, retirements, or seeking other offices, 21 Democrats and 3 Republicans. We do anticipate that Shelley Pingree from Maine will return as the co-chair. And then the STEAM caucus, STEAM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And the STEAM caucus will be losing us a total of 10 members, 7 Democrats and 3 Republicans. Co-chair Suzanne Bonamici, who we will be hearing from. It's anticipated that she will be returning. One note, the Republican lead of both the Congressional Arts Caucus and the Congressional STEAM Caucus was Representative Elise Stefanik of New York. We anticipate that she will not be returning, and as we find out a little bit more information on who will assume those roles, we will certainly report that out to you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So committee leadership changes with the flip in the House. So will be power within congressional committees. I have just highlighted several here. There may be more. We may learn of more as Congress, as the 118th Congress convenes on January 3rd. House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, highly important because they handle NEA, NEH funding. David Joyce will be the new chairman, and Shelley Pingree will continue her very important role, but as ranking member. Labor HHS Education Appropriations Subcommittee is a very important committee for arts education. And Tom Cole will be the new chairman there, and we expect that Rosa DeLauro will be a ranking member. Both of them seem to, they've been through flips like this before, and both seem to have a very good working relationship with each other. One thing to highlight on Ways and Means is that Vern Buchanan, who is a co-sponsor of the Performing Arts Tax Parity Act, which again is a bill that allows for a deduction of arts expenses for creative artists who make $100,000 or less. He is actually vying for leadership of this committee. So you assume that that would be helpful to arts legislation if he does in fact gain the chairmanship. So that's something to keep a lookout for. And then education and labor and small business, certainly arts education, education and labor committee is very important, as well as small business for a lot of the creative economy proposals that arts advocates support. We do have 2 hardliners in terms of the role that federal government should play, both within education and within small business, respectively, with Representatives Virginia Fox and Blake Lutenmeyer. So we will continue, obviously, to make the rounds and with them, but that is just something to note as well. Next slide. Great. I won't spend too much time here because I know Nina went over it, but we are right now in a state of where Democrats hold 50 seats, Republicans hold 49. The runoff in Georgia that Nina mentioned is on December 6th. Nina mentioned why that matters, the ability to confirm appointees, quicker advancement of bills, also creating a buffer vote if there is either an illness or a centrist Democrat box at the time of a vote. So I think that that kind of spells out why Georgia is still incredibly important during this time, as it will, again, help determine the makeup of power in the Senate. Next slide. So the Senate Cultural Caucus, unlike the Congressional Arts Caucus in the House, will see no losses. And Senator Susan Collins and Senator Jack Reed are anticipated to remain as co-chairs. Both have been instrumental in and supportive of increased NEA, NEH funding. So we think that that's very good news. Next slide. And here's a list of, as of today, the 36 members of the Senate Cultural Caucus. I think it would be a good idea for arts advocates, if you don't see your senator on this list, to call their office or to send them an email through their website, imploring them to be a part of the Senate Cultural Caucus to show their support for arts and culture. Josh is going to be up a little bit later to give you some tips on how to reach out to your members of Congress this year. Next slide. Excuse me. So Senate Appropriations, I think that the Senate Appropriations Committee is where you're going to see the biggest change for particularly for arts funding. Senator Patty Murray of Washington will be the new chairwoman of the committee, taking over for a retiring Patrick Leahy of Vermont, and ranking member Susan Collins will be taking over for a retiring Richard Shelby of Alabama. Both have shown support for both NEA and NEH funding, as well as increases in arts education funding over the last 4 years. So we consider that to be good news. And then in the Senate Help Committee, HELP stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Senator Bernie Sanders it's been reported that he has indicated interest in being the new chairman of the HELP Committee. Senator Rand Paul is in line to become the ranking member with a departing Richard Burr from North Carolina. The issue here is that Senator Paul would like some Senate oversight power, and the Senate Help Committee doesn't offer that to him. So it's been it's been reported that he is looking for a Senate oversight position and may forego this ranking membership. But of course, we will continue to report out there as we hear more. Next slide, please. And then quickly, just a quick shift to lame duck session. Congress is back to finish its work with the main goal of funding the government by December 16th to avoid a federal government shutdown. For arts advocacy, we are watching the Department of Interior funding. The House of Representatives passed its Interior Appropriations Bill at $207 million, which is $27 million above last year's number. Senate Democrats released draft language of its appropriations bills back in the summer. and it only listed NEA and NEH funding at $195 million. Arts advocates are, of course, rallying around the $207 million number. We think this is a good step toward a dollar per capita funding for the NEA and NEH, which right now only funds about 54 cents per American. Next slide. And so here is a voter voice campaign that Americans for the Arts and American Action Fund created for you as a arts advocate to contact your member of Congress to, again, support that $207 million number. That would be a $27 million increase over last year, at a time when the arts community really needs it the most, coming post-pandemic. Next slide. And then finally, we're not sure if there's going to be a tax bill during lame duck session. We know that Democrats and Republicans are trying to coalesce around R&D and child tax credit extensions. If they do try to pass something, the legislation would have a narrow focus, but there are several items in play and important to the arts. I'll just quickly mention the first two in the interest of time. The Performing Artists Parity and Tax Act, PATBA, which I mentioned earlier, that Congressman Vern Buchanan was a Republican co-sponsor for. It's actually been introduced on the House side by Judy Chu, and then on the Senate side by Senator Mark Warner, and again provides a qualified deduction for artists' expenses for those making $100,000 or less. And then the universal charitable deduction, looking to reinstate that. So non-itemizers can take at least a $300 deduction for charitable giving. This expired back in 2021. And so we are looking to try and reinstate that as well. Next slide, please. And that's all for me for now.
Thank you, Tushar. I'm going to now ask Jeremy Johnson to join us. Jeremy is from Cleveland, Ohio, and we've mentioned that Congressman David Joyce is going to be taking over likely chairmanship of the House Interior Appropriations Committee. So Jeremy, all eyes will go on Cleveland now. They've moved from Portland, Maine, where Shelley Pingree was, and now they're moving to Cleveland, Ohio. Tell us, we know that David Joyce has a great arts voting record in committee. He's said great things, but tell us about the relationship he has with Cleveland and the arts.
Well, first off, Nina, thanks for having me. It's great to be around so many smart people and educating us on the state of our federal government and these programs. I can tell you, Clevelanders, greater Clevelanders, and those from Northeast Ohio are really excited about Representative Joyce's leadership. He's been on the Appropriations Committee prior, and now that he's slated to be chair of the Interior House Appropriations Committee, we are thrilled because he's no stranger to being an art supporter, and Ohio being that state where we are both sides of the aisle, and we are really thrilled to be working with him. I can tell you at Assembly for the Arts, we're the Regional Arts Council for Northeast Ohio, that our primary lobbyist advocates, they are also very close and have worked for years with Representative Joyce. We are just really looking forward to working across the aisle, and especially to support the representative's work to forward arts and culture and the creative economy. So we're really thrilled about that. And I'm still, full disclosure, I'm from Cleveland, but I've returned to Cleveland, been here a year and a half, and I'm so thrilled to be re-establishing these relationships with our federal delegation.
Jeremy, Nolan talked about also creating new talking points for this new change in Congress. And I know that you are one of the leaders in the new Economic Impact 6 study. How will that play a role?
This will be enormous. And I am shaking the trees here in Northeast Ohio because this is the first time that Greater Cleveland has participated in the Arts and Economic Prosperity 6 study. It's a bit of a mouthful, AEP 6, but it's going to be a true game changer for Cleveland and the 399 cities. And let me tell you why. We are constantly, as everybody on this call knows, we are constantly making the economic case for the arts. This will be the first national study with economic numbers that we will be able to take to our congressional leaders and our state leaders and local leaders as well, to look at the economic impact of the arts. And furthermore, let me share, and I don't want to jump the gun here or steal the thunder, but many of the people on this call know this study includes a special emphasis on the role of BIPOC organizations and BIPOC audiences and how they are influenced by the arts and the creative economy. We are so thrilled that we will be able to bring that data. We talked a lot about data. We will be able to bring that data back to our elected officials and say, here are the numbers, the most recent numbers as we come out of what I call the before time, the pandemic. So this is going to be critical, not just for Northeast Ohio, but for the country.
Thank you. The timing couldn't be more perfect to have you as a leader in Cleveland and having that economic impact study coming out in 2023, in the fall of 2023. I'm hearing early October. So thank you, and we'll be on speed dial.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nina.
Next, I'd like to bring on Tara Proby to pick up on that thread of what Jeremy was talking about, of having this focus on equity and diversity issues in the economic impact plan. And now she's our lead person on our legislative agenda and diversity. Tara.
Thank you, Nina. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion goals within an advocacy context, Americans for the Arts is currently monitoring as well as creating legislation that advances DEI in the arts and arts education. We're also working to advance our existing DEI efforts within federal agencies such as the National Endowment for the Arts. And another way that we're working to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion goals when it relates to the arts is by creating pipeline opportunities for diverse communities. So an example of this would be trying to establish a pipeline program with various arts and humanities departments at different universities for diverse students. Next slide, please. So when it comes to legislation and some of the bills that we're monitoring, we are currently monitoring Congresswoman Barbara Lee's Advancing Equity Through the Arts and Humanities Act of 2022. This is a bill that was introduced by the Congresswoman in April of this year, and essentially it works to address inequity in the arts and humanities by providing NEA funding to BIPOC-led organizations. As with anything else that we've mentioned on this call, in order to advance this legislation, it does require bipartisan support. So given the current congressional landscape, we're asking advocates to really foster relationships with both parties, Republican and Democrat members of Congress. Next slide, please. So another issue that falls within the DEI frame, and this is also an arts education issue, is arts and juvenile justice. And the way that we're working to advance this goal is primarily working with the Arts and Juvenile Justice Working Group. This is a group comprised of community stakeholders and nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to advocating for creative arts therapies being integrated into the juvenile justice system. This year, one of our major actions when it comes to arts and juvenile justice was meeting with Liz Ryan, who serves as the administrator of the Department of Justice's Office of Delinquency, Juvenile Justice Prevention. And really the purpose of this meeting was to discuss fiscal year 23 appropriations funding. And one of the things that Americans for the Arts asked for with our colleagues in the Arts and Juvenile Justice Working Group was for a funding level of no less than $5 million to go towards the newly established Arts and Juvenile Justice Demonstration Program to advance arts integration into diversion, prevention, reentry, and secure detention juvenile justice programs in the form of funding to service providers and researchers. And again, just reinforcing how this works into the current congressional landscape, we are asking advocates to, reach across the aisle and collaborate with both parties, Republican and Democrat, to get that bipartisan support and move the needle forward on these initiatives. And that's it for my section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara. And I'm going to ask you to stay on and bring back your colleagues, Tushar and Jeremy, for a Q&A session. And before I begin the Q&A, I want to just mention a couple of things. People have asked for links and copies of the PowerPoint slides. We posted it a couple times, but I want you to know it's already been posted on the ArtsU resource section of the webinar. And I believe that they'll post it again in the chat right now. So you don't have to worry about it. Those live links within each slide will be there. I wanted to clarify when Tushar was talking about Representative Stefanik not coming back. It's not that she's not coming back to Congress, but she won't be returning as the co-chairs of those two caucuses, the STEAM caucus and the Arts caucus. And in fact, she's elevating to a very high level within the party and becoming the chair of the Republican Steering Committee. And what the title of that committee doesn't say is how important it is, because this is the policy agenda that the Republican House Party gets involved in determining what their platforms are. So a previous co-chair of the Arts Caucus and the STEAM Caucus is quite significant. That is now the chair of the Republican Steering Committee in the House. Okay, so now I'm going to the Q&A, and we're going to start off with a question from my friend Sam Waterston that's been upvoted several times, and it is, what are the prospects for and best vehicles for getting workforce development dollars to the creative industries and creative workforce? And how does the election impact support the Place and Create Acts? Tushar, you want to take that first?
Sure. It's a very good question. I think that, you first have to start off with the thought that with this Congress, with the 118th Congress coming up, that you're going to need bipartisan support. And the CREATE Act actually did on the Senate side. It failed to garner that bipartisan support on the House side. And so I think that, work is going to have to be done to try and shore up a couple of Republicans on the House side. I think that, we've also been told by members of the Small Business Committee that we should also kind of have a two-pronged parallel approach, doing whatever we can to pass workforce provisions within Congress, but also working with the Department of Labor at an agency level to see what we can do on the regulatory side as well.
And Sam, I will also contribute to this answer to say that I think we should take the model that NEVA created with getting SFOG supported in a bipartisan, bicameral way. And that especially with these jobs bills, I think it's going to take an effort of not just the nonprofit arts community, but the for-profit arts community that the NEVA folks represent, that you folks represent, coming together strongly in a united way to make this happen. I think it's quite possible.
Nina, I'm going to jump in there to
Yes,
echo
Jeremy.
your comments to Sean, who hails from Cleveland, Ohio, by the way, and helped to lead that huge NEVA effort, working across these agencies, especially the workforce agencies, labor. In my former work in New Jersey, working with then Mayor Cory Booker, there was huge investment with across the aisle through the Labor Department, the Federal Labor Department. We have ways to do more of that, certainly with arts and culture, for-profit and nonprofit creative sectors. So just wanted to chime in on that.
Sure. And then one more question is there any risk to the president's United We Stand support for the NEA, NEH, and AmeriCorps to invest in the arts as a strategy for placemaking and further social cohesion? That would probably, Tushar, do you have anything on that one?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again? I didn't.
Sure.
catch
Is
it.
there any risk to the president's United We Stand support for the NEA, NEH, and AmeriCorps to invest in the arts as a strategy for placemaking and social cohesion?
I mean, my personal opinion is no. I know that can, potentially be seen as politically loaded in some sense, but I think as arts advocates, we need to continue to take a stand on some of these important issues, and so I commend him for doing so.
And I would just like to add the creation through executive order of the new President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities has a very specific focus on equity issues, and especially I can see it taking on the issues of United We Stand. Now, the committee members have not been appointed yet, but you should know that they do not need Senate confirmation. So I'm hoping that that's going to be happening soon. I do believe that they have an executive director, at least in the background, beginning work. And I think that it could be very strong on these issues. And that I believe the artists, that the president does see the arts as part of the solution in these hate crimes and other things. Tara, is there anything you want to add before we move on to the next panel? Okay, great. Okay, thank you, panelists. And now I'd like to introduce with our slide the next group that we'll be having come on, which it will be on state and local issues. So we'll have from Americans for the Arts, Jay Dick, and then Senior Director of State and Local Government Affairs, Josh Reynolds, Government Affairs Coordinator at Americans for the Arts, and then our two outside wonderful member guests, Tom DeCaney with Create California and Patrick McWhorter with Arizona Citizens for the Arts. Jay, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, Nina. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to do a quick overview of the states along with how it will possibly affect the arts in your states. So buckle up, we're in for a quick little 10 minutes here. So every 4 years, there's a major election at the state level, and 2022 was that year. 36 governors were up for re-election. 88 of the 99 legislative chambers were up in 46 states, and 85% of all legislators were up for election. With all the potential focus of a tidal wave, the state elections actually from a historical perspective didn't really change too much, and we'll find out here why. Next slide. As I stated, there was, gubernatorial elections were held in 36 states and 3 territories this year, with 31 incumbent governors eligible for re-election, which left 8 leaving for another job out there. Pre-election, we had 22 Democratic governors and 28 Republican governors. This time around, the Democrats actually picked up 2 seats and the Republicans lost 2, assuming that you see Florida, or I'm sorry, Alaska has not been colored in, that's going to stay in the Republican hands with Governor Mike Dunleavy getting reelected. Republicans, though, also picked up in Nevada, a surprise, as everyone knows, with Governor Sisolak, who lost to Republican Joe Lombardo. Democrats also did some interesting things. They picked up really narrowly in Arizona, and I know Patrick Piper will talk a little bit about that, in Maryland and in Massachusetts. So overall, we have a 24-26 split with our governors. That's closer than it's been in decades, and so we're right on the path there. Next slide, please. We talk about trifectas at the state level government. That's when one party controls both the House, the Senate, and the gubernatorial seat in each state. The election this year puts Democrats at 17 trifectas. That's up 3 from last time. Republicans are down to 21 states. That's -2. And the number of divided states is down to 10, which is -3. The Republicans' numbers should go up 1 with Alaska as it comes through, and maybe even New Hampshire. But Democrats picked up Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, and Minnesota, but lost Nevada, while the Republican Party lost Arizona. I should also note, just because you have a trifecta, or you don't have a trifecta, doesn't mean there's things going on. In Kansas and Kentucky, they have a Democratic governor, but they have a veto-proof supermajority of the Republican Party in this case. So it's almost like a trifecta in these states. And you see more and more of this happening there. Again, the most divided the nation's been since the 1800s. Red is redder and blue is bluer. Next slide. Let's do some interesting facts here. Women in the legislature didn't change much with this election. About 30% of all of the 7,000 legislators are women. Of interest in Florida, Kentucky, women are mostly of the Republican Party. Oftentimes we don't think that, but that's certainly the case here. Delaware, Florida, Nebraska is states where the most gains happen for women legislators. Governor's offices, 12 women are now governors. That's 24% of all governors. So again, you're seeing a little bit of growth there. That's an all-time record with that too. Next slide. Women will also, for the first time, serve simultaneously as governor and lieutenant governor in 2 states, Arkansas and Massachusetts. Please forgive Maryland there, I have a little typo there. But in Maryland, Governor-elect Wes Moore, and I found this hard to believe, becomes only the 3rd Black governor in the United States' history, of all states, 3rd Black governor. In Maryland, the governor joins the lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller are the only people of color, are all people of color, first, again, for any state. So again, we're seeing a lot of equity and inclusion issues going on. And then, of course, there's hundreds of new legislators around that we're going to get to know. Next slide. So in, as I said, I mentioned about veto-proof majorities. Half the states now, up from 21, over half the states now will have veto-proof majorities, both red and blue there. 17 in Republicans veto-proof majorities, and 9 in the Democrats. You can see which states pick those up there. But you know, there's opportunities. So this is where the arts really have a chance to step in and shine. There's at least 32 new chamber leaders, meaning Senate presidents, speakers of the houses, things along those lines, that you have new opportunities. So make sure that you're building these relationships. Just because they have a D or an R behind their name doesn't mean that they're automatically going to support or oppose the arts and culture. So get to know them and make sure that you're educating them. So in addition to those 32 new leaders there, we have 9 new governors and 16 new lieutenant governors. Get to know them, educate them about why the arts matter to their states. And then we have multiple new committee chairs. So, you know, appropriations committee chairs, education committee chairs, things like that. Again, all these new opportunities that you as state arts advocates can be out there working to make sure that you're educating them to have positive arts venues, art opportunities out there. Next slide. I want to call out a really great example of bipartisan arts support. In Florida, Jennifer Jones of the Florida Cultural Coalition down there was a big part of this. In Florida, this last year, a bipartisan group of legislators led by the 4 down here appropriated $59 million to fund Florida's cultural programs and projects. This is an all-time high. Now, keep in mind, this is a Republican-led legislature with a Republican governor. but they went in, they said, here's why the arts matter to the citizens of Florida, why it really is an important bipartisan issue. So you see these four representatives, Anna Ekamani, Carlos Merrill Smith, Jay Trumbull, and Javier Williamson, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. They are actually going to sneak peek, get our 2022 Public Leadership in the Arts Award this year for their bipartisan work in Florida. So think about bipartisan. We have a lot of single controlled legislators out there. You have to work with the party in control. The arts are great bipartisans, and you can do this. Next slide, please. Some other takeaways here. State budgets for next year are estimated to be increasing by 4.2%. This is actually down from 16.5% in 2022 when they were spending ARPA funds. So combine this with governors of both parties have collectively called for approximately $15 billion in tax cuts. The historic appropriations for state arts agencies could be in danger. So again, advocates, you need to be out there working with the political parties there to say, you know, hey, the arts are really important to our economy. Do not cut the arts' budgets. If anything, you know, give them an increase there. So we have really big, you know, potential issues given, you know, where we're at with the budgets there. Next slide. I've already talked about budget and tax cuts, but infrastructure. So, you know, we certainly have a lot of building going on with the ARPA funds. There's a lot of ways that the arts can be part of that process there too, with cultural enhancements or transportation enhancements. So how can we be working with them? Mental health is certainly going to be something that's going on here. Medicaid spending is going to be down to 0.8%, we estimate, from 10%. So a lot of big decrease there. And so there's less money for, there could be less money for other programs like the arts because they're going to have to spend it more on the Medicaid there. But the also potential focus here or positive is that arts and mental health care is something that's going to get more and more attention out there. And so I think that's a great area at the state level to be talking about, to making sure that, hey, the arts are really part of the solution here. Workforce development and education are always areas where the arts are play a role there. So again, we're going to see stuff like this. And then stuff that Tara's mentioned, civil justice. And so using the arts to promote equitable reforms. I'm hearing this over and over again in states, red and blue, that they're looking to do civil justice reform. And so that's a big part for the arts there. Next slide. I was recently at an event with the panel bipartisan legislative leaders, and some of the things that they brought up here. You see this list, mental health, affordable health, inflation. Notice the arts aren't on here, but the arts overlap with a lot of these cases, even fentanyl drug use, how the arts can help with opioid addictions or things along those lines. So lots of great ways to work with that. Next slide. So what do you think those state leaders don't want to touch? What are those third rails? You know, it's interesting. The Republicans were talking about, we do not want to tighten abortion regulations, and we do not want to talk about expanding gun rights. They're tired of those issues there. Democrats are tired of talking about sports betting and climate change. And then everyone is like, no data privacy and no raising taxes. So it's interesting to see what they do not want to be talking about. They just want to get down to legislating things that truly that are most people care about. Next slide. That was a really quick overview of legislative stuff. I want to talk quickly about ballot initiatives before we bring Tom on here. This year, there's 136 ballot initiatives on the ballot. That's down from 172. So we're seeing it continued going down. There's two types of ballot measures: citizens-led, legislative-led, and citizens-led. We'll talk about that in a second. There was only 39 citizen initiatives this year. That's down, consecutively over the last few years. So you're seeing less and less state ballot initiatives. But those that are out there, 2/3 pass, and this is holding fairly consistently. So as most ballot initiatives are sponsored by the state legislature, consider trying to get an arts ballot initiative like Tom did in California there, or like Minnesota's legacy amendment that appropriates dollars for the legislature there. Next slide. You can see that from this which states does what. Every state has some form of a ballot question. The gray states, only the legislature can do it. In the orange states, like California, citizens can propose ballot initiatives, but the legislature can also do it. And in New Mexico and Maryland, only they can only do by citizen initiative. So there's another way of going about getting change. It doesn't have to just be through the legislature. Next slide, please. Some of the more interesting parts of the ballot initiatives were abortion, tobacco, marijuana, and civil justice reform. These are all areas that are equitable advocacy opportunities for us. So how can we be promoting, through maybe reduced mandatory minimums or things like that, more equitable solutions for our citizens out there. Next slide. Real quickly, local ballot initiatives. Don't really, there's really no database for this, but I want to talk about one of them really quick and then turn it over to Tom. In Miami Beach, there was a bond initiative, Yes to Arts, passed with 65% of the budget there. $159 million for bonds and cultural institutions. The idea is they want to rebrand Miami Beach away from a party destination to the home for arts and culture. And I think that's wonderful. So if your city or county has had any local initiatives, please, send me an email. I'd love to highlight those and learn about those and put them in our database. So next slide. That was a really quick rundown of what's going on. I'm now going to be very happy to bring Tom on to the camera here to talk about California Prop 28. I won't steal his thunder. So Tom, thank you very much for being with us, and please take it away, sir.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Tom DeCaney. I'm the Executive Director of Create California, and we're the arts education policy and advocacy organization dedicated to making sure that every California student gets a well-rounded education that includes the visual and performing arts and in their curriculum. And we're celebrating. So Prop 28 was a voter initiative. As Jay mentioned, it was put on the ballot as a citizens initiative. I'm just going to give an overview of the measure, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we got here and how the measure came to be on the ballot. So Prop 28 passed overwhelmingly with 64% of California voters voting in favor. So for a California measure, that's a pretty significant majority. Prop 28 will require an ongoing annual source of funding for K-12 public schools for visual and performing arts education equal to, at a minimum, 1% of the total state and local revenues that local education agencies receive every year under Prop 98. So in California, we have another voter measure called Prop 98 that sets a baseline for local education agency funding, and Prop 28 will be 1% of that in any given year. So it will fluctuate year to year, which was part of its traction and why it received no organized opposition. But we anticipate in fiscal year 23 that that'll be about $800 million to $1 billion total. That said, California is a very large state, so you have to remember that we have 5.9 million public school students in California. That said, this is no short of a historic moment for arts education funding in California, and we believe it may be the largest allocation for arts education funding in the United States. There is an equity-weighted formula to the distribution of the funds. Funds will be distributed annually by the California Department of Education on a per-student allocation at the site level. And there is a weighted formula for low-income students. We don't know exactly what the allocation will be in the first year of implementation, but we envision it'll range between $141 per student at the base level and $160 per student on the weighted equity formula end. Again, those numbers are slated to shift depending on final revenues and the total Prop 98 allocation for education funding. The funds are restricted to go to 80% of the funds are required to go to personnel. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here. So any school that has 500 or more students will be required to spend 80% or more on personnel. So that includes credentialed visual and performing arts teachers, certificated staff, and teacher aides. The remaining 20% is available for supplies and materials, arts provider partnerships, and any other uses that the school site might use, as long as it's restricted to arts education. There is a do not supplant clause. We're working through some of the nuances of what that'll look like, but it does not allow a school site to supplant any existing arts education funding. And that was a critical part of the measure to make sure that we didn't undermine any existing funding. And up to 1% of funds are available for administrative costs. And there is a waiver clause that will allow the state superintendent of public instruction to offer waivers to any school site for various reasons. The first main reason we anticipate will be the teacher shortage. We anticipate this will be about a 50% increase to total visual and performing arts teachers in the state of California, which is historic, but those teachers just don't exist. So our next big task is to be feeding the teacher pipeline in California. And those waivers, we imagine, will go to things like perhaps waiting for schools to be able to find the credentialed teachers they need to fill that 80% requirement. Just a little bit about how the campaign started. It was introduced by Austin Buettner, who is the former superintendent of LA Unified School District. He partnered with Fender Musical Instruments to start the signature gathering for getting it onto the ballot. Create California was one of the first organizations to endorse and was an ongoing partner in the work. But the actual initiative was led by Austin Buettner and a coalition. They spent a total of about $9.2 million to get it on the ballot and get it passed. It was a little bit more than initially was the goal for fundraising, but the major contributors included $4.27 million from Austin Buettner himself. So we have a lot to thank to Austin Buettner for both initiating the measure, but also funding it. Other major contributors included the California Teacher Association at $2 million, Stephen Ballmer at $1.5 million, Fender Musical Instruments at $1.2 million, and Monica Rosenthal, who some of you may know as the actress from Everybody Loves Raymond, at $1 million. So it really was an entertainment industry, Los Angeles-based funding mechanism that really supported the voter initiative. So we're incredibly grateful to them, and we're going to be their partners in making sure implementation has the fidelity we all hope for. So thanks so much, Jay, for inviting me, and I'll be looking forward to helping answer any questions. Oh, Jay, you might be muted there.
Doing this for several years, I forget this. Tom, thank you so much. We appreciate all the work you're doing in California. Next up, we have Patrick Mahorter of the Arizona Citizens. A few interesting things going on in Arizona, so love to hear a little bit more about your take, Patrick. You're muted too, sir.
Boy, I tell you what, I had to click two buttons. It's great to be with all of you today. I come from perhaps what is maybe the most purple state in the nation, I guess, the way we talk about these things with colors, because we saw some very mixed results in our election. So to some extent, people know more about what's happened with the counting of the ballots in Arizona than probably just about any state. We've been all over the national headlines. I will tell you, while we have been sitting on this webinar, they actually just dropped the last 1,300 ballots in the statewide election. They have finished counting every ballot. There is now going to be a period of recounts because we have some races that are so close. Our Attorney General's race, out of 2.5 million ballots cast, is the Democratic candidate leads by 510 votes. This was the fourth highest turnout in a midterm election since 1974 in Arizona. The turnout was 62.5% of the registered voters, and the total number of ballots cast, 2.5 million, is almost the number that was cast for president in 2016. So the first part of the story here in Arizona is that we have seen an incredible amount of money spent on the elections. Our Senate race that has received so much attention, there was well over $100 million spent on the races here, and nothing like that has ever been spent on any statewide races in Arizona in the past. The other thing that was happening with our elections is we, just like everywhere, we were looking at the first elections after redistricting. Now, we have an independent redistricting commission here. Nonetheless, there was a bit of a Republican leaning emphasis in the way the districts were redrawn this decade. And so that's why our congressional delegation, which was 5 Democrats and 4 Republicans, flipped, and it's now 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. I will tell you that one of the seats was an open district, and the new Republican Congressman Juan Ciscomani is actually a very reasonable Republican to work with, and I was in a civic leadership program with him in 2011, so I know him very well. And so if you need any help with the new Representative Ciscomani, let me know. And then finally, I will come to the implications of all of this for the arts, because at the state level, the state legislative level and our state government level, we have a historic circumstance. We have a Democratic governor, which, by the way, this is the first time since 1948 that Arizona has 2 Democratic U.S. senators and a Democratic governor. By the way, our governor won with a landslide of 17,000 votes out of 2.5 million cast. I call that a landslide because, of course, President Biden won the state 2 years ago with that landslide of 10,000. So you can see all of our elections are very close here, and that's the story. But we are still very divided. The state legislature remains a GOP-controlled legislature with a 1-vote margin in both the House and the Senate. And one of the things that means for us is that we will probably see Democrats writing the state budget again this year, which they basically did last year because the Republicans couldn't get their votes together on their own. And this time we have a Democratic governor who has to sign the final budget. This past year, we secured the highest ever amount for the State Arts Commission, $5 million. We'll be seeking at least that, if not more. The incoming governor made a personal promise to me several months ago of putting at least $10 million into her budget request for the State Arts Commission. So we're hopeful that the fact that Democrats will be very influential in writing the budget this year means that we will have another good year for funding for our Arts Commission. And that's kind of a quick summary. There's a lot of nuance in all of that, but be happy to cover it in questions.
Jay, you're on mute.
Second time I've done that. Oh my gosh, thanks, Dina. Let's switch over to Josh here at American Arts to talk about what we should be doing between now and the election day. Josh, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jay, and thank you to our wonderful speakers. It's so lovely to be here with you guys. So yeah, I'm here to talk about what you can be doing as an advocate starting yesterday, really. So right off the bat, let's talk about, who to engage. You need to connect with your new and returning elected officials from every level of government, that being your local city council person, your mayor, all the way up through your senator and the executive federal office. And you should be doing this now. You don't need to wait until swearing in, especially if it's a new member to Congress or your state legislature. They're most likely be sworn in January, but they still will have their campaign emails active, and you can find this time to, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but maybe invite them to any holiday parties or any sort of event you have currently during this time of year to kind of start building that relationship. Likewise, you can encourage your friends, relatives, members of your organizations to find their elected officials via online tools. Congress has a good tool to find your federal elected members. Mostly, I think every single state will have some sort of Find My Legislator webpage, and you just use your address or zip code, and you can find exactly who represents you, and then as well, usually links to their contact pages, so you can start building out those relationships. And this is really important. Not only do you want to reach the members themselves, but if they have staff, really start to build those important relationships with staff. Jay and I were at an event last week where some state elected officials were speaking, and everyone echoed the sentiment that if you don't treat their staff well, or you don't acknowledge their staff are representations of the member, that's a non-starter, and you're not going to even have them in the room to have a conversation with them. And especially district staff, some members even want to prefer you meet with them in their home offices, especially if they're from rural communities, way before you meet them in a state capitol or in Washington, D.C. So it's about building those authentic relationships quickly and earnestly. And lastly, sign up for some newsletters and follow them on social media so you get to know them. And also, you should know that you don't want to assume that they know as much about the arts and culture as you do. You are the subject matter experts. So do some research on them, see if they have any backgrounds in the arts or their family does, and that can kind of help you get your foot in the door. A lot of times, especially if it's a new member or you think that they aren't as inclined to be an arts supporter, but also know that they rely on their constituents to make these informed decisions, especially at a state and local level, because like I mentioned before, they might have a small or no staff at all. So they really need you to help bring them the hard data, which Americans for the Arts and other organizations provide, as well as there's no good data without a good story. So you have that personal connection and that touch to really drive the point home. All right, so now let's look at a timetable for advocacy. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about some key dates for federal advocacy. As Tushar mentioned earlier, the Georgia Senate runoffs is December 6th, so we'll be eyeing that closely. January 3rd, 2023 is the swearing-in day for the 118th Congress. We anticipate that around March 2023, the administration budget recommendations will be sent out to Congress. And then from May through June, we'll really start to see the House of Representatives Appropriations Subcommittee to start to mark up their bills for the NEH, NEA, and IMLS funds. So those are really, really important. Let's stay up to date on that, as well as state advocacy. There's approximately only about 7 year-round legislatures on a state level. So most sessions will begin early January, and a majority of them will also be out by the end of summer. So not only do some of these people have small staff, they're also working on a huge time constraint. So again, trying to get your foot in the door as soon as possible is really, really important to help. So when it's February and they have to move fast on a bill to support the arts in your state, you're not just talking to them for the first time. It's, hey, I saw you at my holiday party, or something along the lines of that. And then also your local elections are ongoing, and those calendars are most likely going to be year round as well, and easily accessible from your municipal databases. So be sure to stay up on that. Next slide, please. And lastly, let's talk about how to engage with your elected officials. So everybody can use the Voter Voice grassroots software that Americans for the Arts has on our webpage, as well as the Arts Action Fund, to send messages to Congress and your elected officials. But also, you really should be sending congratulatory letters, preferably a handwritten letter. But if not, just make sure that you address them personally and you introduce yourself as well as your organization or who you represent or who you are in the arts and culture creative sector, to let them know that you represent them and or they represent you, and that you are happy to be in their district and happy to have this facilitation for a productive relationship. You can also join the Arts Action Fund, become a member, and stay up to date with any news blasts with that. If you do not run a local arts agency or any sort of advocacy organization at the state level, we encourage you to find those who are active in your community and build that coalition and show some support and find ways to advocate that way. Like I mentioned, send some congratulatory letters, and then invite elected officials to events early and often. I'm really, really going to hit this as well, because even if they can't come, this is an opportunity for a staff member to show up. I was former legislative staff, and I really was flattered when I got to attend in my member's stead. And you can still build those relationships, and you'd be surprised how many people would actually show up to a monthly lunch for your organization if you send them enough notice. As well as, ask any key new members to request specific committee assignments if you're pretty engaged and you know which committees in your state or Congress act on the arts. If you have a champion, ask them to be included in those committee assignments and put their name forward for that. And also, if you have an arts advocacy day, or at any level of government, be sure to let them know early and remind them often that is happening. And those are our tips and tricks to get engaged. And I think now we're going to move to the Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. And I'm going to ask your colleagues, Jay and Patrick and Tom, to come back online. And the first question is for Tom DeCaney. And the question is from Cynthia Chen, who asks, how can arts advocates be helpful in engaging in public policy implementation? For example, now that Prop 28 has passed, what can advocates do to ensure the measure is effectively implemented?
It's a great question, and certainly front of mind for us. We're looking to develop 2 work groups, one that'll be about Prop 28 implementation accountability, and another will be about the teacher pipeline. We imagine the teacher pipeline work group will have a many-year trajectory in terms of building the teacher pipeline. But I think it's also really notifying the California Department of Education that you're interested in learning about how the policy moves forward. And we'll be putting out calls to action through our network. So if people want to sign up for our newsletter, we'll be certainly letting people know when those opportunities arise for contacting the Department of Ed for any clarification, and if there are any opportunities for engaging in policy development.
And your website is createca.org?
Correct. And I put it up earlier in the chat here.
Okay, great. I also have a follow-up question, and that is, how is it possible you had no opposition to your state proposition and it didn't require any new taxes?
That's a great question. Well, I think the no new taxes was kind of a non-starter if we wanted to win at the ballot. So that's a very common, as we saw earlier, nobody wants to raise taxes and it's a really hard lift. So I think what was incredible is in the original crafting was working with the teacher unions. And that's where we got the 80% personnel requirement, was to really get the buy-in from the California Teachers Association and the broader teacher union community. So they were huge partners in the lift to get this passed. As I mentioned, they were the second largest contributors to the actual campaign, not to mention just the ground game they offer in terms of getting the word out to voters. So I think the strong union support in California, which is a state that has a supermajority of Democrats, was able to knock out any kind of organized opposition. But what was shocking is we didn't even see organized opposition from groups like Jarvis taxpayers or the more kind of anti-restrictive categorical folks. And I think it just goes to show the real power that the arts have at the ballot. In San Francisco, we passed a local ballot measure. Looking at Miami, I think we should not sell ourselves short in the potential we have right now in a moment when our democracy is so divided, to be emphasizing the ways in which the arts and arts education bring people together.
Yeah, that's terrific. And Patrick, a question for you is, what in the large turnout that you had during a midterm election, and it was even larger than a presidential election year, you were giving numbers on, what was different in the makeup of who voted? Young voters, BIPOC voters, first-time voters. Did it change in different parts of the state, or was that consistently throughout the state? And why did they come out in such big numbers? What can you teach others in other states to make that happen?
Well, I believe they're still going to be doing quite a bit of post-election analysis to answer all those questions more precisely. But what I think we know so far, and we know this, I think, from the last 3 or 4 election cycles here. I've been in Arizona for over 40 years, and I've seen more change in the last 3 or 4 years than I've seen throughout. But what's happening is things we've been hearing were going to happen. One is the turnout of younger voters has been phenomenal. And there has been a significantly funded effort to get those younger voters out. That also means a much greater BIPOC turnout because so many of those younger voters are BIPOC. Interestingly, while we're known for our elderly population here, we're one of the youngest populations in the country in average age. So when you get that turnout, it makes a difference in the outcomes, and hence we become more purple. But I do want to say, I talked about money at the beginning of my presentation, because if you look at the races where there were people known as election deniers, where there was a lot of money spent on those races, those are the ones that lost. But they did not lose everywhere. In some of the state legislative districts, they were elected. In fact, the new president of the state Senate was one of the leaders of the audit of the 2022 election. So there is still quite a mix of the election deniers and other types of GOP. By the way, the Speaker of the House is not one of those. So we even have, if you will, divided Republican leadership in the legislature, if you look at it that way. At the end of the day, I believe money poured into these races made the biggest difference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of you. And now I'd like to move on to our honored guest, who is Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, coming freshly off the election campaign, having successfully won. We're so grateful. And the Arts Action Fund is so grateful that we've been able to support your re-election efforts. And you are one of the best arts champions on Capitol Hill, as I've told our audience. And we're so pleased that you're here. I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you so much, Nina. Thank you for the kind introduction. And it's really an honor to be here. Thank you for this event. I'm sorry I missed some of it. I know my staff is monitoring, but it sounds like a great conversation. It's wonderful to be here with so many artists and advocates and arts leaders from across the country. So I have been an advocate for the arts and arts education in large part because of the way I grew up. I've had a lifelong love of and appreciation for the arts. My mom was a piano teacher. She belonged to a folklore society. We had a music room in our house. My mom painted modern hard edge art back in the 60s. And she took us to museums growing up, my brothers and me. And I learned all about manufacturing in the auto industry at the Detroit Institute of Arts, looking at the Diego Rivera murals. And so the arts are really powerful. It opened my mind, certainly allowed me to see things in different perspectives. And I know that's why it's so important to advocate for the arts and arts education. So I serve on the Education Labor Committee, as well as the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And I've seen over the years how the arts can boost creativity and innovation, which is what we need to not only grow our economy, but also how do we solve the complicated problems that are facing our country? We need creative people to come up with new ideas. And as I think Tom was saying, the arts bring us together, which is so important right now when our sometimes it feels like our country is so divided, Congress is divided, the arts can bring us together. So I learned about the integration of arts and design into science, technology, engineering, and math. And back in 2015, I founded and currently still co-chair the Congressional STEAM Caucus, where we talk about the benefits of arts integration in science, technology, engineering, and math, making sure that people have the ability to think creatively. And I've also, as a longtime supporter of arts education, introduced the Arts Education for All Act. In fact, I got involved in policy as a parent volunteer in my own public school district here in Northwest Oregon. We saw a budget initiative pass in the legislature years ago, or initiative passed by the voters years ago that cut funding to schools. So I was the parent who was saying, where's the band, the orchestra, the fine arts, the music? And so the Arts Education for All bill identifies all the resources that can and should be used for arts education programs, starting with early childhood education, the K-12 system, juvenile justice facilities, because we know, and you know as arts advocates, that all students benefit from the arts and arts education, but there are gaps in opportunity. The privileged families will make sure that their students are exposed, their children are exposed to the arts, but there's a gap and we need to fill that gap. And make sure everyone has that opportunity. So I'll keep fighting for the bill in the next Congress. I think it unlikely that it gets through this year at the very end of the year, but I'm going to be looking for partners to help me move this forward. I know there's a great deal of uncertainty right now about priorities for the new Congress. We're still figuring out, who's doing what and when. And I think there may be some concern in the arts community about whether we'd be able to maintain federal support for the arts. But there's also reasons to be optimistic and hopeful about the future. I have served both in the minority and in the majority, now going back to I'll be in the minority again, but throughout it all, we have always been able to push back against the calls to defund for example, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We've always been able to have bipartisan support. I know that the COVID has been really tough, particularly on low-income communities, BIPOC communities, but our recovery efforts were marked with sort of historic levels of federal funding for the arts. I was really glad to see my colleagues step up and recognize the importance of helping arts organizations get through really challenging times. So recently, I had the honor of having the NEA chair, Jackson, in the district I represent here in Northwest Oregon, and we visited with local arts organizations and museums. We spoke with artists and creators and had a lot of important conversations about advancing a sort of representative and inclusive vision for the arts. It was really inspiring, and I just reaffirmed my commitment to leveraging the resources at all levels of government to support the arts. I want to note that the sort of reach and scale of the creative economy is massive. We cannot let it fail. Working across political, I'll be working across political differences to support the arts. And I know that when there were some complaints made during the COVID relief bills that we shouldn't have funding for the arts, I noted that a lot of the people complaining were probably at home watching movies and listening to music and playing games that were all designed by and created by the creative people who work in the creative economy. So I'm grateful that over the years, the arts have had that bipartisan support. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to center this support. I'm also honored to have helped lead the effort asking President Biden to reinstate the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. I'm grateful and thankful that the President is fulfilling that request. And as we continue with COVID recovery and trying to get back to some kind of normal, although it's really challenging in many ways, we need to build on this historic support that we saw during this current Congress and the priority that the administration has put on the arts. So one of the bills, in addition to the Arts Education for All, I've introduced the Creative Act, and that's to invest in bolstering the creative economy and improving the quality and availability of arts-related programming and, importantly, facilities. So the Creative Act builds on the financial support from the NEA during the pandemic by expanding access to federal grants for capital projects. It's been so important when in my conversations with people in the creative industry. It provides opportunities for maintaining, renovating, and retrofitting existing arts facilities. Importantly, the bill provides grants for employment, staffing, and production to put Americans back to work and make sure our arts organizations can continue. So I'm proud to be leading two of the priority bills for Americans for the Arts, and I look forward to advocating with you in the next Congress as we move forward. I know I'm planning on making the Creative Act and the Arts Education for All Act bipartisan pieces of legislation. So as you're speaking with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, we will be doing the same to hopefully move these through on a bipartisan basis. So I'll always be a champion for the arts and for arts education, and honored to be your partner in Congress. I'll continue to advocate for the resources that artists and arts organizations need to thrive. One of the things I want to mention as well is the need for affordable housing, particularly not just in urban areas, but in suburban and rural areas as well. We know that that's important for artists. If you don't have a place to live, it's hard to be making art. So that is something that's intersects with the need for arts funding, is making sure that we have affordable housing. So thank you again, everyone, for having me with you. Thank you for all the work that you do to enrich the social and cultural fabric of our communities and our nation. I look forward to seeing you when you're up on the Hill and going forward with your advocacy. So thank you again, everybody. And I gotta, thank you for the Creative Act in the chat. Thanks, everybody. I wish I could stay, but I have overlapping commitments today. But just thank you again, everyone, for all you're doing, and keep up the great work. And I'll see you on the Hill, and let's get this done. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much. You are truly an arts hero. Okay, I'm handing it over to Mital to close us out. It's been a pleasure doing this webinar today. Mital.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you to our experts, and thank you to everyone that attended and participated in today's webinar. A reminder that this event was recorded and will be available for replay in a few business days. Be sure to visit us at artsu.americansforthearts.org for other opportunities and resources. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.